for a conference this is. It's about discussing new, interesting, innovative ideas to make a positive improvement in the community through volunteering, through volunteerism. And that right there ought to be empowering, because you can take any of the ideas here that you hear, you can come up with some idea of your own, and you have the authority to go out and start a movement to help a lot of people. And that sounds audacious. Those are big goals. And it seems like big goals, big ambitions are scary. They scare us because they expose us, right, to the possibility of failure. In this case, going out into the community of public failure even. And that's terrifying. And it's true, you might fail. You might. And you're better for it. You're better for it. You'll be better poised for the next big goal that you're working towards, better poised to achieve it. That fear, though, is not what should stop us. We shouldn't be stopped from taking action because we're afraid of that failure. I'm going to talk to you tonight about 4 techniques, 4 strategies to tackle, just to start a big goal. But before I do that, I want to offer something. It's easy to put off doing something. It wasn't long ago that Michael conceived of this idea and put it into action. It's easy to get bogged down in research, though. We want to look into doing something before we actually do it. And it's a challenge because it prevents us often from taking action. So here's the takeaway here. You have to be willing to suspend the requirement of knowing how. You'll never know the perfect way to go about your project until you actually get into the thick of it. So here's what I would suggest. You can do research, that's all right, but just stay 1 chapter ahead of where your present action step is. Just 1 chapter. So you're not preventing it from stopping you from actually getting started. All right, fair enough? So I'm going to give you 4 different strategies that I've used to help you just start a big goal. All right? First, you've got to make it possible. Now, if I were to gather a cross-section of the community and pose the question, is eliminating homelessness in Spokane an achievable goal? You'd probably find 3 different types of reactions. There's one group that would say, no, it's not possible. I'm not even going to let my mind go there because it's not possible. The second group would say, it's not possible, but why don't we scale it back to something that, my current set of limitations suggests is possible. And there's a third group that will say, yeah, we can do that, and here's what it's going to take to do it. Now, the goal is to get from one of those first 2 groups to the third group. There was a book written almost 60 years ago, great book written by a guy named David Schwartz. It's called The Magic of Thinking Big. You may have heard of it. It's still a bestseller, I think. But he would go around talking to groups of people, putting on small seminars like this or giving speeches, and he'd ask this question. He'd say, is it possible within the next 30 years to eliminate the need for prisons in this country? And instantly, and invariably, people would say no, and they'd start listing all the reasons why this just cannot happen. It's impossible. And he'd listen for 5 or 10 minutes. Real momentum had built up with this group of people that he's talking to around this idea that it's impossible. And he'd say, okay, each of you has listed a number of ideas, a number of reasons why this is not possible to eliminate the need for prisons in this country. I want you just to consider, as a favor to me, for a couple of minutes, to consider that it is possible. And tell me how. It would get quiet. And then some brave soul raises their hand and says, well, what if we work to reduce poverty in really impoverished areas? That could help. And people would think about it, and then another idea would come out, and another idea, and another idea. And soon, there would be real momentum and enthusiasm for this concept. 10 minutes before, it was impossible. Now it's possible all of a sudden. And all they did was change their mindset. They made it possible in their mind. And what happens is your mind creates a pathway forward. So I say, how do we eliminate the need or how do we eliminate homelessness in Spokane? Well, I wonder if tiny homes could maybe be incorporated in there somehow. Or the Block Project. What about, is there some other means of treating opioid addiction amongst homeless addicts to help them dig out of homelessness? There's ways. Your mind will create a path forward. So that's number 1, make it possible. Number 2, this is a mental exercise. You're going to break it down into smaller pieces. I was a commodities trader for a number of years before I started writing. And it always amazed me how how other traders would never consider these huge pieces of business they're putting on, millions of dollars in a swoop, because they're thinking in terms of dollars per bushel. So it's $5, $6, $7 a bushel. In fact, the minimum tick or price change in an agricultural futures contract is of 1/4 of a cent. It's minute. And I would routinely adjust my prices by 1 cent or 5 cents or 10 cents per bushel in order to win a piece of business. Think about that, 5 cents a bushel. You see trains going along the tracks. A train of corn, at 5 cents is actually $22,000. On an ocean-going vessel, say I sold to some export destination, it's worth $118,000. And you see where I'm going with this, right? Through these small little things come huge results. I used to work for a co-op in Montana, mid-size, it wasn't even that big. At 5 cents to them is $500,000. It's huge. So you break it up into small steps. Now, if your goal is something like writing a book, you need 40 to 60,000 words to make that happen. And that seems daunting, doesn't it? Sit down and you got to type out 50,000 words to have a published book. But if you think of it in terms of 500 words a day, which is 2 or 3 paragraphs, you can have a rough draft in 3.5 months. Suddenly it's really achievable, isn't it, when you put it in that kind of perspective? So you break it up into smaller pieces. First, make it possible. Second, break it up into smaller pieces. Number 3, this is where I call it a mind dump. You're going to create a rough draft of your vision. Whatever this goal that gets you passionate, that gets you fired up, start putting stuff down on paper. Anything that comes to mind gets put down right here. All the smaller parts you talked about that we addressed in number 2, where you break it into smaller pieces. I was thinking about it in terms of this conference. Because Michael Pickens conceived of this, and he had this idea to promote volunteerism and try and instigate, community improvement through voluntary means. So there's this goal. What's he need? Is there speakers? What kind of topics will work? Is there any speakers that come to mind that could maybe come and present ideas? What about a venue? Advertising? How are you going to get the word out? Throw all that stuff down. And what we're doing here is trying to create some kind of momentum for ourselves and generate more enthusiasm within us. You'll notice I haven't even addressed any kind of challenge that might come up, and I don't want to yet, because our passion right now is in its infancy. And we don't want to trip that up, so you're generating enthusiasm. Now, the next part is where people do tend to trip up. And when we're at this early stage, it seems like little things can derail us before we even get started. So number 4, you have to surround yourself with people who encourage and empower you. It's sad but true that quite frequently naysayers, people that discourage us, are closest to us. And it's because they want to protect us. They don't want us to get hurt. They'll say things like that. I just don't want you to get hurt. They'll say, what about this challenge? That makes it impossible. You can't go down that path. And they're genuinely worried for us. But they're also holding us back from actually accomplishing something. And it's really funny when we're in this heightened emotional state, excited about some grand ambition, some community-changing ambition, we're vulnerable to the feedback we get. It's just kind of the way it is. So if it's positive, we're looking for affirmation. Somebody gives us positive feedback, that's a big deal. But if it's negative, it can derail you before you even start. Years ago, when I was 8 or 10 years old, it's a hilarious story about me breaking my arm. I was 8 or 10 years old. I fell off a horse and broke my arm. And a little bit more to it than that. I was sitting on the back of this horse. My cousin, a couple years younger than me, had the reins. He was not a very good horseman. This horse named Thunder, who was really arrogant, I remember, he was a jerk. His older brother, my cousin's older brother, goes running past on his horse named Lickety Split, and Thunder's not going to be held back, so he takes off. And my cousin can't rein him in. So I managed to hang on for 2 or 3 strides before I fall off and hit the dirt, break my arm. My cousin, another 2 or 3 strides, and then he falls off, and we scream bloody murder because we're kids and we're hurt and scared. And so our parents come out because we're freaking out. They start walking us up. They see I'm holding my arm and in pain. And my cousin screams at me. He goes, "Sean, you're going to die." And in that emotional state, I'm walking along, and I believed him. And so I said, "I know." And that's the way it is. When we're in that place where we need affirmation, we need some positive reinforcement, If we don't get it, we tend to believe whatever feedback we get. So you got to surround yourself with cheerleaders. Now, there's certain people you have to tell. You got to tell your spouse if you're going about some grand ambition. You can't hide that. But if you need cheerleaders, you got some right here. And if you need somebody, you can contact me, and I will tell you, you got this, because you do. I promise you, it can be done. You just have to get after it. Now, all I've talked about is really building momentum within you, because there is going to be challenges that come up. We've ignored those up to this point intentionally because we want to grow our own ambition and motivation. That part comes later, but you're going to get there, and you're going to have to incorporate that into your plan. But first, you've got to make it possible. Second, break it down into small pieces. Craft your vision. Number 3, surround yourself with cheerleaders to get yourself started, get that momentum, and then when those challenges come up, you can bust through them. Folks, I'm so glad I got to come out here.